Hello and welcome to the second podcast from the Primates Reference Group on Ethnic Diversity, Inclusion and Racial Justice. We're talking to you today about diversity in representation and decision-making in the church. And I'm really happy to be joined by Reverend Eileen Kremen and Reverend Philip McKinley. I'm Lucy Michael, and we hope that you enjoy the conversation with us tonight. Eileen, let's hear a little bit about you and your background and why you joined the Primates Group.
Well, I've been ordained for 36 years. This year I'll be celebrating my 30 years as a priest. I was actually ordained in the Church of England, and I've been working and living in Ireland for the past 23 years. I'm now retired and I'm living in County Cork and have lived and worked in County Cork since I came to Ireland. I've been involved with the Archbishop's Group since its inception, and I guess one of the reasons really was that because of my previous experience in the Church of England. I was one of the founding members of a similar group, which is called the Committee for Black Anglican Concerns. And we were talking about things like representation and also about vocations and so on. The group was meant to advise the Archbishops and General Synod on concerns to do with lack of representation and involvement of minority ethnic Anglicans in the life of the wider church. Interestingly enough, I didn't think I'd be doing the same thing in Ireland, but there you go.
Well, we're really glad to have you working with us on it. Philip, let's hear from you. Up a little bit further north than Eileen, but not too far.
No.
I know we have a lot of representation from the south of the island tonight, but we did have Maitri on the last podcast representing the north. So I'm happy to say we're looking at our diversity across the island too, right? Over to you, Philip.
Yeah, so I'm a priest of a year and a half, and I'm serving in St. Bridget's Cathedral in Kildare in what's called the Kildare Central Mission, and I'm also a curator assistant in Dunboyne and Rathmaline Parish, and they're both in the Diocese of Meath and Kildare, both really commuter belt and both across diverse communities. I'm really proud to be part of the Primates Reference Group on diversity. Before I was ordained, I was a university chaplain in Dublin City University, very diverse student body. I worked for the Irish Council of Churches, and I worked for an interesting Church of Ireland project called the Hard Gospel, which came out of the Drumcree standoff and was looking at peace building and how the Church of Ireland contributes to tackling sectarianism, tackling racism. I also sing in an intercultural gospel choir, the Discovery Gospel Choir. So this has been a sort of passion of mine to see how the Church of Ireland especially can respond to the changes in Irish society and reflect and be leaders in this area.
And tonight we're talking about leadership because we've been talking for a while now about the need to think about diversity in decision-making and participation in the church, right from select vestry level at parish level. We know those Easter vestries are coming up fast on us, but all the way through the different levels of the church, right up to General Synod, which of course is in the middle of its triennium at the moment. So we've a little while to go until we have the next elections to that. But of course, what we're really talking about tonight is just how do we look at and assess diversity in decision-making in the church, and what do we do about it if we find it lacking? So I want to start off really by why do we need to do it? Why is it important to have ethnic diversity within church leadership and decision-making? Who'd like to kick off? Eileen, can I come to you?
Yeah. For me, it's important when you consider just how much Ireland has changed, particularly recently. When I came in 2001, I found that churches in Cork were still pretty monochrome. And in the 5 years after that, I was just watching gradually families moving over from Africa and beginning to join Church of Ireland churches here. And of course, it wasn't anything strange to have Africans coming in such numbers at that time. I mean, in Cork, the Chinese community have been living in Cork for well over 40 years, probably over 50 years. You know, wherever there is a Chinese restaurant, there is a Chinese family. So it's, you know, I've seen the change and the intermingling and the mixing over the years, and it's made me feel a bit at home. Coming from London myself, I was born and brought up in London, very diverse community, very multicultural, very multiracial. So, you know, for me, it's important that people, if they're coming to church, they see it in terms of what is outside of the church building, in terms of the community. There's an old saying that says, you know, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And for a lot of our minority ethnic brothers and sisters, you know, they don't see where they can fit in. So I mean, I don't know how you feel, Philip, on this. So that was my sort of start on that.
Yeah, I think like it's big picture stuff. What is the church? What is the point of the church? What's the how do we think or understand the church? And one of the things the Church of Ireland, Anglicanism is a synodical church, and these are all churchy terms. Synodality, but is a big word in the Catholic Church at the moment because they're undergoing a big global synodical process to see what are the big questions. How do we restructure? How do we reorganize to meet the needs of the modern world? And we are a synodical church. And another really important Church of Ireland word, if I can use it, is the word representative. We have a representative church body, that word representation, and a huge amount of organizing how we do what we do is based on our synodality. Sorry for using that churchy term again, but also being representative. So we are faced with an Irish society that has changed, but it is a problem if our church has not changed. But we have enough flexibility within how we're supposed to be organized to actually respond to that. So if we're to be good Anglicans, if we're to be good, you know, the best example of how the Church of Ireland works, we are representative and we respond to these changes. Ireland is diverse, so the Church of Ireland should be diverse also.
I love that.
I mean, the other thing that suddenly came to me was that I know usually the church is very slow at change, very slow. I'm involved in another project here, and I was looking at some old Select Vestry minute books, and I was looking at them to see how the Select Vestry in those days was made up. Now, this was like in the 1960s, I think, and 70s. And at the time, in that particular part of the world, it was mostly men. In fact, in some vestries, it was all men. And not just all men, but you'd be guaranteed that there would be at least one or two businessmen, some farmers, maybe the squire in the big house, probably one or two of them. And they made the decisions despite the fact that on Sunday morning their churches were full probably of families, women and children. So the vestries in those days were no way representative of the congregations that they served. And we know things are changing now, and we have women on our vestries. We have younger people on our vestries, not just retired folk who have the time. And this, for me, to have people from minority ethnic backgrounds coming to our churches, it's time that they're seen in the decision-making bodies of our church as well. If you can't see it, you can't be it.
And Eileen, you were talking about, you know, a time quite a while ago when we started to see our communities really become more ethnically diverse, like from 1997 onwards. I mean, I know from my own work working with mixed race Irish, that certainly there was members of our church going back to the 40s and 50s who were of African descent. So it's not new, but certainly I think we saw the numbers change in 1997, became obvious. And Philip, some of the projects that you were involved in the early 2000s were really responding to that and benefiting from that. But I guess now we would have thought that after 20 years, 25 years, we would have seen much greater participation at select vestry level and at those upper levels of the church. But I think the representative church body doesn't look that representative when we talk about the ethnicity of our members.
No.
Can I talk to you about the theology of this? How does ethnic diversity within decision-making of our church reflect the Christian values that we hold? Is there something we can draw on in terms of our theological beliefs that can help us to understand? Philip, I'm going to ask you to stay away from any big words, or at least explain them to me, because lay members like me can't always keep up. So we love to learn. Give us a bit of advice on how the theology helps us.
Well, there's loads of ways to unpack this, but one is that the church would always want to be able to speak out against racism, because racism is wrong, racism is evil, and we want to stand for justice because God is a God of justice, and God loves all of humanity, and God does not discriminate on the basis of race. So it is evil and wrong that there is racism, but nobody would question that. But there's impacts, there's a consequence to believing that, because if we have a church that has not looked at inclusion, not looked at diversifying, and is remaining just with one ethnic group in a diverse context, then our ability to speak to racism is totally nullified. We don't really have the moral authority to speak into that space. So if we're passionate about justice and we believe this to be a cause, then it begins in our own home with our own work and our own internal systems first. And that gives us a mandate, that gives us insights, that gives us perspective. So even just as simple as starting with God is the God of justice, we can open up and unpack what that looks like in the day-to-day decision-making. And when we vote, when we come to choose people to represent us, this is where the rubber hits the road.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's there are two things. Firstly, the fact that we reflect the image of God. We're often taught that all individuals are created in the image of God. It's mentioned in the very first chapter of Genesis. And when we come as Christians to baptism, baptism is the one thing that all of us as Christians have in common. That, once you're baptized, you're understood to be a member of the church and therefore full members of the church. So it seems a bit odd to, on the one hand, be baptizing everyone, as it were. And then when it comes to much later on, when you can begin to participate in your churches, there seems to be a little bit of a barrier. It's like there's a hiccup. Actually, you're baptized, but you're not quite there. We don't need to hear what you have to say. It's painful, actually, for those of us who have not been given a chance to become more involved.
There's a lazy assumption in that, isn't there, Eileen, that I think when we hear that we're made in the image of God, very often we think that God is an image of us. And it puts our skin color, our ethnicity, or culture at the center of our beliefs, rather than the other way around, which is that we are all made in the image of God, which means we have much more in common than we might assume in the day-to-day. I think that's really powerful. And I'm so interested in this because, of course, as a sociologist, I come to this from a slightly different perspective, which is to be not quite as interested in racism as evil, or the moral authority of it, but the harm that it can do. whether it's the individual discrimination or even violence, right through to the fact that as a society, we just don't function if we don't take the benefits of everybody's talents and skills. So maybe let's jump to the next question of how can the church benefit if we really thought about diversity in our decision-making and leadership? Could the Church of Ireland really benefit from us taking that seriously? Philip, can I come to you on that one, and then I'll come to Eileen?
Yeah, I mean, like we talk about brain drain and brain gain, and we in the West inherit those that migrate to Ireland. The statistics around third level qualifications and skills and insights and so on is well documented. So we have this extraordinary population change, but with it a whole variety of skills. But from the church's perspective, we have Sunday school teachers and musicians and Bible study leaders and people with incredible spiritual gifts, cultural gifts, social gifts, as well as academic and intellectual skills. So it's literally like a treasure or a gift that has been given to Ireland, and it can only be of benefit. I was involved in a project with the Africa Centre. This is going back 25 years. And when you were talking about, the beginnings of migration in the kind of patterns that we have in Ireland today, I was looking back at some initiatives I was involved in from a church's perspective 20 years ago, and they've been talking about this issue, participation, leadership, voting. All this has been talked about for 20 years, reports, and it's just one of the areas that has just not been cracked adequately. So while there's been a lot of kind of conversation about it, we still need to see the fruit and the results of it. But it's there for the benefit of the church, the growth of the church. The most dynamic growing church in Western Europe is really the migrant church, the church that has come to Europe. That is where the greatest shifts are happening, and the Irish religious landscape is shifting quite rapidly. So I'm excited by that. There's lots to get involved in, but our church needs to change. We need to do more, and we particularly look at this issue of representation.
I'm thinking of all the times I've sat in a church committee where they're looking for lawyers or accountants, but they don't know any available. And I'm thinking, I know some, but they aren't of the skin color that you were thinking of. So I very, very attracted by that idea that actually we just haven't taken the brain drain seriously, or brain gain. Eileen, let me come to you.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of assumptions. I mean, all this has got to start from the church itself, the parish, the individual parish church. When people are coming to churches and wanting to worship God, obviously some of them have been welcomed with open arms, and it's great and it's lovely. I mean, I can remember going to church myself and being made welcome. No one asked me whether or not I wanted to be on a PCC or a church council or anything like that. They just welcomed me and loved me, and gradually I kind of got involved because they treated me like a fellow human being. And that's what some of us want, is to be treated as if we are a fellow human being, coming to church to worship God. And that's our main aim. When it gets to getting more involved, I can remember, this is going back to when I went for selection for ordination. And one of the selectors had actually said that they thought that maybe I needed to understand a bit more about the Church of England. My parents were Anglican. My grandparents were Anglican. I was baptized in the Church of England. How much more understanding do I need? Some of the people that are coming to our churches are coming from Anglican churches in their home country. They know how things work. They're coming and they they want to feel at home. But we're still looked on as if we are just coming in and from another planet, and we don't know anything about all of this. So, like, what would we be doing on the select vestry? We don't understand the way the Church of Ireland works.
Now, Eileen, you are touching straight on a topic that is very close to my heart, which is the way that people are really very often blamed for their own lack of participation when they have not been invited or included fully, or they're given a chance as a kind of a token representative and then not really supported. Just given your experience, can you talk to us a little bit about the risk of allowing minorities in the church to be blamed for their own exclusion and how that happens, maybe by blaming language or culture or something else?
Yeah, it's a tough one. One of the things that churches are very good at is, I think, is hospitality. I found that after a while, I was actually beginning to get a bit of an intolerance to wheat. Everywhere I went, there were tray bakes and cakes and flour and everything. And I just, after a while of starting to feel ill, I then started to refuse eating these things, and people looked at me as if I had two heads. We're good at the hospitality, we're good at the tea after church and so on. And I looked at other families from other countries in the church, and they didn't stay for tea or coffee. They didn't eat a lot of the stuff that was there. It needs just a bit of sensitivity and a bit of education, I think, and asking people the question, well, what kinds of things do you eat? What would you like?
What kind of things do you like to do? I suppose rather than stand around after church drinking tea and eating tray bags, people might like to be involved with something actively.
Absolutely,
bring
absolutely.
Their ideas.
But a lot of it, we're in some ways we're waiting to be asked. In other ways, sometimes the clergy can be a bit of the gatekeepers in this, and don't see that, that these people need to be encouraged, not only welcomed, but encouraged as well. I certainly, when I started getting involved in my local church donkeys years ago, before I was actually ordained, I helped with the youth work, something that anyone can do. They don't have to be white to do it. And I helped with the Sunday school. I helped the treasurer. I did various little bits and pieces, got myself more and more involved. But only because the people made me feel loved, they made me feel valued, and they made me feel as if, I was at home.
So important, yeah.
It's so important, really.
Yeah. And we hear it from other organizations, like sports organizations, for example, who say, oh, well, they came and volunteered once and now that they don't come anymore. But actually, when you talk to people who say, well, I did go and volunteer for my son's football team, but nobody spoke to me and nobody told me how things were, and there was a cliquey chat going on, and I just felt like a spare tool standing there with nothing to do, no purpose, and I just didn't feel like going back. And that's how we lose volunteers really quickly, is to actually not properly include them. Philip,
and that's how we lose people from our churches.
Absolutely, yeah. Just to feel useful is a wonderful thing. And Philip, are there other obstacles that we encounter just in thinking? Eileen and I were just talking there about how people get blamed for their own exclusion. But are there other obstacles that we encounter when we try and think about including a more diverse range of people in our decision making and our activities?
Look, I think the Church of Ireland, like every church, would love to think that we are all about 100% worshipping Jesus Christ, and that is like our core central thing, which would be a beautiful thing. The reality is there is huge cultural, historical, and social trappings that come with the Church of Ireland. In certain areas, it's very geared towards a certain class. In other areas, it's very geared towards certain professions like farming. It's very geared in the context of a divided island. It's geared sometimes towards political allegiances. And therefore, I remember going into a church once in Dublin city centre, and a very elderly lady who was an amazing woman came up to me. She was the first person who walked up to me, and she had a stick, and she poked me with her stick, and she said, "If you don't like it here, it's your own fault. We're lovely." But now she was wonderful. But I think there's a bit of that attitude actually can pervade that from where we're standing. If you don't like it here, it's your fault because we're lovely. But we actually can't see how wrapped up in certain cultural traditions and certain practices, in certain cliques, in certain kind of groupings, in certain families that have dominated parishes or different dynamics like that. And it can be hard for anybody from from another county or sometimes to break some of those kind of cultures, and it can be extra hard for people from other countries and cultures. So there is an education piece, there is a learning piece, there's an awareness, but there's only so far sometimes you can go with education. I think Eileen's thing of just saying it's about the heart and the sincerity. Real, genuine love and respect will crack this, and that cuts through culture when it's sincere and deep.
I love when you get into the love and solidarity and justice. It's great. But here I'm going to press you two, because we've talked about why we need to do it, and we've talked about some of the challenges in doing it. But actually, listeners and viewers to this podcast will want to know, well, what do we do beyond, the love and solidarity and justice piece? Are there actionable steps that we can take to really think about diversity in leadership and decision making at all levels of our church, lay and clergy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would say like one, there's two things that come to mind immediately. One is that vote. Because if you're in a parish, you can register as a vestry person, and that gives you a vote, and it allows you to stand for office and allows you to vote for people. So take that vote seriously. If you're on a diocesan synod, you can vote. You don't always have to have the same kind of people in the same roles. Like, use your vote. If you're on general synod, you can vote. There's been famous historic votes, the vote for the ordination of women, for example, in the 1980s, that changed the church. Well, we can vote. We can change the church with our vote. The power is in so many people's hands to vote, is the first thing. The second is encouragement, like Barnabas. Seeing the potential in somebody and seeing what fruit can bear fruit within their life, and how the church can help and be part of all that. So just seeing potential and being the encouraging space and creating encouraging spaces for people's gifts to flourish.
In order really for you to do that, you have to talk to people. And, I have seen white members of churches totally ignoring the Black and brown people that are there. And the white people will go and gravitate to the people they're used to, the people they know. They won't want to go and talk to someone who they've never talked to before. You only have to look at the way some people are when you get to the peace and the communion service. Some actually feel uncomfortable even just shaking a hand of somebody who they don't know. You have to, in order to see the potential in people, you have to get to know them first. And we need to do a bit more of that. Is like getting to know people. We have to encourage them to even come to the Easter vestry. Because a lot of them will come to church on a Sunday, but they won't come to the Easter vestry. If you're not there at the Easter vestry, then you're not likely to get more involved, as it were, or end up on the select vestry. And it can be very discouraging, I think, for people as well, for Black people, when you go to, if you do actually go to the Easter vestry and you see the elections going on, and it's the same people being elected year after year after year. And in some cases, there isn't even a vote. People are nominated, and when it gets to the 12, that's it. So, you know, it's not easy. It's not easy, but we really do have to kind of get to know people first, find out what their skills are, find out what their gifts are, and get people involved in other little things that are going on in the church first. And when they feel comfortable in that, move on then to the next stage of inviting them to the Easter vestry. And then who knows, they may end up on the select vestry. And then when they get to the select vestry, they may not like what they see or hear. They may see people behaving in ways that they would think are totally unchristian. You know, we have to look at the structures that we have and see how they actually function, and whether they function well, whether they function in a way that would encourage people to be more involved. It's not a place for a power struggle, but it can often seem like that sometimes.
I'm laughing, Eileen, because I know that when my arm was twisted to join a church committee, in fact, it was the Diocesan Synod, and I had never sat on the select vestry. And it was only afterwards that I joined the select vestry in my parish. But it was very difficult to find out how things worked, who to talk to, the rules that applied, what kinds of issues might come up for debate, and what was the role of the representative. So I think there's a lot of just kind of explaining that to people as well, and saying, you know, Diocesan Synod looks like a one-day event. But actually it's the committees that go along with it, and getting involved at that level and understanding the power to change your church at that level. But we really have to think about diversifying the lists of nominations that go that way. Apart from the select vestries, actually, who are we nominating to Diocesan Synod? Because that's not very diverse at all.
No.
Yeah.
Across the board, there's a huge problem at diocesan synods. Now, a huge game changer is this whole new recommendations around good governance for charities, and I really do believe in 10 years from time, we're going to see a lot of changes, because precisely you're not handed an induction pack because one person knows how it works and that person's been elected for 50 years. And that's just, you know, it becomes a self-perpetuating in a sense. But we need, you know, there needs much shorter terms. We need, how the whole culture of how our select vestries, our diocesan synods, our general synod, all of that needs to change quite quickly, so that there's much better succession, there's much better training up of new people, identifying shorter terms, not just the same people for the same length of time, not just all men, not just, you know, we're going to have to look at how we do good practice. It's going to take a little bit of time because the church has quite a bit of catching up to do on it. But I mean, it begins this Easter. The power is in people's hands right across the island of Ireland to make some of these changes, and it begins now. And if we get this stuff wrong, we now have the state holding us to account through charity regulations. So, but we don't need to. We've got a theological basis. We've got an ecclesiological basis. This is how to do church well.
And I think we've got about 4 weeks from when this podcast comes out until some of the Easter vestries, which is a really good time to get out and talk to people and see if you can persuade them to put themselves forward and be nominated. Because if you're waiting for the vote list, the nomination list at the Easter vestry, you're too late, really, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So look, let's wrap this up and leave our viewers and our listeners with a final word. What would you like to see the church look like, and how viable do you think that is with the progress that we're currently making?
It's one of the I'm just saying, for me, that one of the privileges of being retired is that I'm sitting in the pew in the body of the church on a Sunday. And while I'm there, I can see a vision. I see a vision every Sunday of the congregation coming up to the communion rail and kneeling down to receive. And it struck me, it was one particular Sunday, it just struck me. It was an amazing sight. There was diversity like I'd never seen before. Young, old, black, white, brown, babies, the infirm, farmers, professionals, carers, mothers, fathers, single, married, students. And when they're kneeling at the rail, they're all the same. They're all coming to receive the bread and wine or a blessing for the babies. They're all the same. And I look at that vision, and it's reality for me. And I just feel like this ought to be replicated in nearly every church on the island. It won't be the case, of course, because, you know, there isn't the critical mass, as it were, of Black people to go around to all of the churches. And we tend to be in cities or big towns, in some rural areas, particularly for the migrants that are coming in recently. A lot of them now have been put in rural communities as well. But, you know, in lots of churches, we already have the diversity, but it shouldn't stop at the communion rail. It needs to move right through if we're to be truly representative.
That's lovely. Thank you, Eileen. Philip, leave us with your last vision.
Well, even just very practical things, like I'd love to see in 10 years' time the General Synod as that glimpse of heaven that Eileen has just given for us. It's not at the moment. Our diocesan synods are not. And this is the heartbeat. The General Synod decides, the whole doctrine of the church, decisions about key questions come to the General Synod. So that at our heart, we're hearing and we're listening to diverse perspectives, diverse cultural perspectives, and that our church is designed to receive all that. But that, we in the Republic of Ireland, we are experiencing a horrific spate of arson attack on sites that have been earmarked for either correctly or misinformation around asylum seekers and refugees potentially dwelling in certain places, and these being set on fire. And it is sickening. And I know in Kildare town, we had a kind of rogue misinformation campaign that has just been horrific. So I want to respond to that, and I can speak out against that, but I really want the church to be the image of the kingdom of God, the image of God's creation, and that is the best response to it. That's being countercultural. That's being prophetic. That is speaking truth to power and justice and leading Irish society and showing people this is what peace and this is what the goodness of God looks like, as opposed to the evil that is burning and setting alight and spreading fear and hate. So to be part of a church that leads on that would be immensely wonderful.
Thank you so much, Philip, and thank you, Eileen. And I'm really struck when we first met, it was because the Primate commissioned a survey of views on racial justice in the Church of Ireland. And one of the big findings was that people felt that there was racism in Irish society, not as bad then as it has become recently, as Philip has said, but that most people in the Church of Ireland who answered the survey did not think there was racism within the Church of Ireland. But racism isn't always burning buildings. It is also keeping your decision-making bodies for certain groups, or not shoving down in the pew and making room for someone new. So look, I've really enjoyed the chat with you both tonight. For our listeners and viewers, we will be at the General Synod in Armagh in May, talking about this and sharing some new resources that are coming out very shortly to help with precisely this. But in the meantime, we encourage everybody to really think about diversity and participation and leadership in your church at every level, whether, as Philip said, it was youth groups and Bible studies, whether, as Eileen says, it's what the communion rail looks like on Sunday, and how many tray bakes are shoved down your throat. But look, we will look forward to revisiting this in our next podcast. For now, thank you so much, Eileen and Philip, and good night, everybody.